Welcome back to the Cutting Room Podcast with your mass creative host, Damian King, here with the second episode of season 3 of the Cutting Room Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed the last episode. It was so much fun to do that episode. I got a lot of good reception from all the videos that I've dropped. I've been messing around. If you haven't followed the channel, go and follow me right now. The Only Damian King on Instagram, the Only Damian King on TikTok, the Cutting Room Podcast on YouTube. I've been messing around with AI, artificial intelligence generated videos to promote all the shorts and all the videos that I drop. It's my first time really messing with it and getting acclimated with it, and it's really fun. It's a really good tool. My favorite create one of my favorite creatives was willing enough to drop some knowledge on me and school me that it's a thing that's coming and everything, and I'm actually glad I dabbled into it. But talking about dabbling in, let's dabble into this second episode, which is why films, why movies, why I love watching films, how I got into it. There's different generations of films, different genres of films that and eras that I felt like very I was very educated with each different era of films that I saw. So we're going to get into the first one, which would have been the first collection of films that I started watching and started studying. And this is going to be a really good one. So, why films? Why I started watching films, how I fell in love with films. The first era of films that I started getting into happened to be when I snuck into one of my siblings' rooms. And it was in that era of times where we were at an age where I feel like going into that bedroom was like a rite of passage, even though they didn't know I was going into, they would want me to mess with their stuff. But actually, the thing I would go into for was to watch these VHS films that I saw and immediately was very intrigued by them. It was a collection of films that I felt would be shaping my childhood. I was very blessed to have those films in my reach. I remember the first time I remember the first time it was a thing where I was told not to go in, and when they would leave the house, I would go inside and pop in a VHS every other day. It was a collection of films that I fell in love with that I feel this generation of adolescents and teens would would find a lot of knowledge in them that you're not going to find on social media. And in my era, these films were the way you found these lessons, these life lessons. I was the type of person that was raised by the television, raised by films. In the last episode, I talked about how my parents separated, and this one, if it felt like what I didn't learn from everything else or from other people, I was learning from these films, life lessons. One of the first movies that I saw in that collection that I started watching, which I have in my hand in VHS form, would be Heavyweights. Heavyweights, if you don't know, it was a early '90s Walt Disney films, and I feel like it's a very overlooked film. You can find it on Disney Plus. If you don't have a chance to, if you've never seen it, check it out. But Heavyweights was one of them, and it was from the same creators as The Mighty Ducks, which, for some of you that don't know, is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Created by Stephen Brill, written by Judd Apatow as well. It stars a couple of the Mighty Ducks actually, which would be Sean Weiss, who played Goldberg, was in it. It was really really good, and also Keenan Thompson. Keenan Thompson also comes out in it. Ben Stiller. A bunch of people as well. It's a really good film. Heavyweights follows the story of Jerry Gardner, who from the opening scene from Heavyweights, it automatically tells you what's happening. Similar to another movie that we're about to talk about, but in that opening scene, it's him getting out of school and thinking he's gonna have a great summer of just chilling, hang out. But it all changes when he gets home from school and his parents have somebody standing in the room, and it's actually the same actor that played Udensky in Holes. So he's talking about going to this fat camp, which they presented it to be just a regular camp, but it turns out that it's a fat camp. And he plays him the video, the promotional video in his living room. And he's like, "It's a fat camp," and he ends up going from being forced by his parents. Now gets there and automatically at the airport meets Keenan Thompson's character, and I think he automatically felt welcomed because the thing that he tells him, that Keenan Thompson tells him, is that Camp Hope is great because you're not the only fat kid. Everyone's a fat kid, and they get picked up by the bus by Pat, who is pretty much has gone there his whole life and is now one of the camp counselors and bus drivers. Really good character. And as I'm watching and it's a he gets to camp and he meets Sean Weiss and Ben Stiller, Jerry Stiller and his wife as well are the camp counselors, and it gets taken over by the infamous uh, Tony Perkins, played by Ben Stiller. So it's a pretty funny thing that it's a pretty good thing when I see Jerry and Ben Stiller work together. They were an amazing dynamic duo of comedy, like a father and son. It's like the same thing as Ken Griffey playing with his dad, or Dwayne the Rock Johnson teaming up with the Soul Man. Pro wrestling, it was like they always had good chemistry, but they each person had their own legacy, if that makes sense. Um, but yeah, it gets taken over by Tony Perkins, who wants to really turn it into the number one weight losing camp and infomercial and everything, and he turns it into basically Camp Hell. It's not Camp Hope anymore because he wants to make them lose weight. He makes them lose weight. Not letting them eat, strict diets and working out, but in a very abusive way. And the reason I love this film, the reason I love Heavyweights, is because if you look at the packaging of the film, if you look at the poster, and you just see it's just it's probably some kid comedy. There's a lot more going on to it. I love that. I love that when you give things a second look and you realize, oh, there's more to this. I appreciate it more because the main thing was that, is it okay to be overweight? Is it okay to be fat? Is it okay, to eat unhealthy? You know, or when do you draw the line? And there's a scene where Pat starts mentioning after they had the big, pig palooza, and they start eating all the food and it's very beautifully shot. Um, and when after everyone wakes up from their food coma and the next morning, he tells them like, when are we gonna draw the line for ourselves, take responsibility and accountability for our own health? So that's when the film, after all the quirky comedy, it starts to get not serious, but it starts to drop knowledge on you because none of these kids had self confidence. They had a dance with the sister camp and everything, all the girls, and they're really pretty girls and everything, and none of these guys could approach them until one of the camp counselors goes up and starts dancing and kind of welcomes everybody. It This film really teaches you about self confidence, because they have the Apache relay at the end of the summer where they face another camp, which is like an all baseball jocks camp. And Camp Hope ends up winning after losing for so many years. And what does that teach you? It really teaches you that if you take responsibility for your own health and you take accountability, you are in control of your own destiny and your own confidence. No one can make you feel what you don't want to feel and what you are not. And that's what I love about Heavyweights. Heavyweights is such a good film. I love it. It's probably one of the films that I usually recommend to people that isn't artsy. None of these films are artsy as well. We're not going to be talking about artsy films today, as much as I love those as well. I love all types of films. And, Disney really, really had a gem in their hands with this one. With the cast, everyone was perfectly cast in this film. Every single person, from the camp counselors to the villain to the kids, it's really good. So many quotes that I drop every single day with my friends and everything. It's a really good film. Another day that I snuck into this bedroom and saw another film that caught my eye. Was It was the very first time I saw The Sandlot. The Sandlot was also in that collection. And I've had the privilege and was very blessed to interview Shane Obezinski, who was part of that cast of The Sandlot. He played Repeat uh, Timmons, and it was a very pinch me moment. I was very happy and very thankful that Shane gave me that opportunity. to Also, tell him the story in a very condensed form of what The Sandlot means to me. Some people would say that The Sandlot is this baseball movie. It's actually more than that, because even though they play baseball, it's about a group of kids, and I remember the first time I saw it, it it really you really grew up with those kids in a way, with every single one of them. It was those films that the new kid in town moves in, doesn't know anybody, also doesn't have self confidence, and finds friendship and brotherhood and solitude in another group of kids that help him get out of this pickle. It was in that era where your friends were more family than your family, because you spend a majority of your time with them a whole summer. And I was very blessed enough that The Sandlot was one of those films as well. Another film that I also saw was Blank Check. Blank Check was also in that collection. And Blank Check, if you haven't heard of it, it was also a film by Disney that I don't think is on Disney Plus. If it is, I could be mistaken. If it is, I recommend it. Blank Check. It it's pretty crazy. Brian Bonzel plays Preston Waters, who's a kid that wishes if he had $1 million, his life would be easier. He gets bullied by his older brothers, and his dad doesn't really like get him. Like, gives him like $20 to spend at a birthday party at a theme park, and that doesn't get him anything. While all these kids are dropped in like $50, $100 for tickets and tokens for rides. So he gets hit by this guy who had robbed $1 million, and is given these checks by the bank that this crooked bank owner gives them, because they're gonna, keep that in the account. So he gets run over by, you know, this robber who robbed the bank, and he gives him a blank check. And Preston, using his computer, his Macintosh, um, types out the texts on the check and fills it out there. Fills it out to $1 million. By if you really think about it, what are the odds that you get this blank check and somehow it's linked to an account that does have $1 million? Yes, that's unbelievable. That's not really believable, but it also teaches you that money doesn't always isn't always going to solve your problems. That's what I learned from blank check. It was one of those things where, for its time, really fit in the mold um of those early 90s films that had a lot to say, but the packaging wasn't always there. And another film that I also was in that collection that wasn't a kids film, but I was very happy that it was, because it turns out that one of those films was very respected, and it turned out to be Dazed and Confused. I remember the first time I ever saw Dazed and Confused. I remember seeing this VHS package, and it had four characters on it doing the see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil, and it had the happy face of the 70s and everything, and I popped it in, and I'll never forget the Gramercy Pictures emblem appear, and you could hear very faintly and then start to rise, Aerosmith's Sweet Emotion. And that opening shot is of the GTO making the U-turn in the parking lot, and then the next shot we see is the blunt being rolled, and rolling up to your high school, and it's also on the last day of school. Something as well that the movie Heavyweights opened up to. Heavyweights and Days of Confused had a very similar opening. Happening on the last day, um, but Dazed and Confused, I knew I wasn't supposed to be watching it. Or I think I didn't understand that it was a movie I probably shouldn't have been watching for its time because of all the drug drinking and everything. But there was so much good in that film. I love Richard Linklater. Linklater it was the director of School of Rock. He did Boyhood. He did Dazed and Confused. Linklater had a huge connection, from Texas, from Austin, that whole area. All his films, some of his films have this thing about taking place during a period of time, whether it was one day or the span of 12 years, which Boyhood took 12 years to do. But watching Dazed and Confused, um, it really, some people, it's just a teen, pothead movie, and it was more than that. It was more than that because we look at the main character, Pink, of what he's going through. Football star, football quarterback going into the new year. He has these two sections of friends that don't mix, whether it be his lost case friends or his football buddies, and he has this choice. He's given by this choice by his football coach. Are you going to be dedicated to your team, and sign this contract that says you're going to, not you're going to promise to not indulge in sexual and drug activity and focus on this champion season at 76, um or is he going to be him and be free, and go to this get these Aerosmith tickets, that is going to happen in the summer. But if you and I was that was the first time I was introduced to a lot of these great actors that ended up being somebody later on in life. Whether it be Matthew McConaughey's character, Wooderson, whether it was O'Banion, played by Ben Affleck, a very young, very baby tooth Ben Affleck. Or we have, who else came out in the Days Confused, man? So many. Anthony Rapp. Anthony Rapp was also in that film. We have so many great references to that era. I remember one time watched Days Confused with my mom, and I think from the opening shot, she started watching and she said it. I'll never forget it. The sweet emotion and the GTO, and the bell bottom clothing. She said it. If I could define the '70s, it was that, and the scenes in the Emporium, the playing pool, going to the school dances, that whole Days of Confused really captured the essence, captured the truity of, uh, the honesty of the '70s and what everyone was going through. Um, but those were a couple of the films that was in that collection. Another couple movies that were in that collection that I won't dab into and we'll get into in another episode down the line, would be The Big Green. The Big Green was also another film that I felt teaches you self confidence. All these films had a lot to do with self confidence. All these films gave lessons to the generation that was watching it. Where you take example like The Big Green, who also had Patrick Renna and had hold on. Yeah, so if you take The Big Green, who also had Sandlot alumni Patrick Renna and Chauncey Leopardi. That team didn't think there were anybody coming from a small, boring town that wasn't going to amount to anything, and they expected the kids that come out of it, the new generation, to not amount to anything. But then, they get their teacher, played by the sister in The Wonder Years. comes from Brit from I think she was from London. She was British, and she comes to this small town to teach the school, and then gets the help of the local deputy dog, and they teach them that hey, getting out there and playing sports is good for the kids, and it's something I feel like this generation doesn't do anymore. All these films that I talk about, whether it was Heavyweights, whether it was The Sandlot, The Big Green, these films, this the holy triumphant of 90s sports films, taught kids that having self-confidence in getting out there, and whether it was losing weight, whether it was trying your best and actually trying something out of your norm, or having the courage enough to go out there and make friends like Smalls did. These three films, if it wasn't taught to you by your parents and you were raised by the television, that's what these three films did to me. That's what it meant for me to study these movies and study these characters, that I sat in my siblings' room when I wasn't supposed to and popping in these VHSs. It was educational, and it taught me a lot. And I was very blessed enough to be in reach of films like that and watching them nonstop whenever, my sibling was out of the house, and I go inside this room, and it felt like, even though I was kind of breaking the rules, it was for the good, because I also was very influenced by these films, that it doesn't not every film has to be artsy, and Kubrick, to teach somebody something. And that's what I loved about these films. It, I recommend these films to anybody that has never seen them or has children. If you have children and you're not getting to them by your own words, sometimes films like that were the tool you needed to get through to children. I know it. Sometimes we hear our parents try to teach us things, whether it's self confidence, whether it's get out of the house, whether it's get on a team, whether it's go out there and make your own money, start a business. If a parent wasn't getting through to you, these films did. It was also films like Angels in the Outfield, and with Danny Glover, Christopher Lloyd, Tony Danza. It it was it was crazy to think that a character like George Knox would be the angel that Roger needed. It's amazing that in the 90s, and also had McConaughey, in a very young McConaughey, probably after Dazed and Confused. But these films, I always felt like that. I always felt like Angels in the Outfield was giving us a lot more than just a baseball film. And one of my favorite moments in Angels in the Outfield was toward in the end of the film, in the last big game, where they're about to take out Tony Danza, uh, and Danny Glover looks over to Roger and tells him, "Got to take him out." And Roger tells him, "No, come on, just one more play. All you got to do is believe." And if you notice that the shot that they did on Danny Glover's face after that line was dropped, Roger has that face of when he sees an angel. The zoom in, and then it's this beautiful shot where Danny Glover turns to Roger and looks at him, and the music plays, the angel music plays. I've always interpreted that scene as if maybe Danny Glover's character, George Knox, was Roger's angel at the end after losing his father. If you really think about, let's talk about Angels in the Outfield a little bit. Roger, you know, is an orphan who's right at the beginning is hit with like a left curve. Is hit with like a curveball because he's been waiting for his dad to come pick him up, and he doesn't. And he tries telling him in his own way that, hey, I'm signing this court thing, and he doesn't is not fully honest with me, and it's at an age where you don't understand things. Everything that your parents tell you, you're gonna believe, and you believe it with hope. You're trying to believe that you're gonna be a family again. And he tells him, Dad, when are we gonna be a family again? Where I'm standing when the Angels win the pennant. What a messed up way to tell your kid that I'm never gonna come pick you up, and that I'm giving you up to the state. And what an amazing performance by everybody. Especially I love the scene where I love, first of all, the every moment in the Angels in the outfield is so great. Like it had no right to be that good. And mixing in all these characters, especially the speech that's given by Danny Glover, so great when at the press conference when he admits that he believes in angels, and the whole thing with Roger, the whole thing with JB, with him being scared of sitting in cars because of what he experienced through when he was homeless with his mom. um Roger's situation with his dad, and Danny Glover ended up adopting both of them, and that's what they really were looking for, was family. George Knox, didn't love anybody but himself, and ends up finding love in these two boys, you know, and so great. And the moral of this episode was that sometimes you have to give things a second look, whether it's films that you think automatically, I'm not gonna like this. There's so many, when you start to dig and look into these films, it's you're gonna find something there, and that's what I love about these collections of films that I saw in my siblings' bedroom. And I'll never forget sitting there and being educated and being influenced, and it would be the groundwork for the next generations of films that I was going to watch that were also in that collection when I got older, and I started going down the collection. It wasn't a line. It was very organized. It was like kids films, and then like teen films, and then adult films. And we'll get into the next generation, the next era of films in another episode. I hope you guys enjoy this episode of why films, why I love, um, why to me one of my greatest pastimes and what I still enjoy to this day is sitting down watching a movie the same way that I watched films when I first started getting into them. And these were the first teachers that I had that would later influence me to be the film lover and director that I am today, and has influenced a lot. So I thank the sibling that had that collection in my reach, because you were building a monster. So if you have any of these, if you've not watched any of the movies that I've recommended, I recommend every single one of them. No order, just watch them. Watch a good film. And as always, pro wrestling is cinematic, and I just love cinema. I love the storytelling. So until the next time, and that's a wrap on this episode of the Cutting Room Podcast with your host Damian King, the Masked Creative. Always remember, pro wrestling is cinematic, and that's a wrap. Cut.